as we get started. Thank you all for coming to our panel, Bridging the Gap. In this panel, you will all be experts on bridges of all kinds, cantilever, wood, steel cable, artsy. This panel is actually about representing middle spectrum characters that lie outside of what we traditionally see with either straight white space marine or giant flaming stereotype. It's kind of these characters that aren't well represented, that sit within the middle of the spectrum. So, quick introductions. My name is Adam Rickert. I am the creative head at Salsa Studios. I'm an artist and UI designer.
Hi, I'm Joe Ortega. I'm the head of development for Salsa Studios and the sort of run everything business related to it.
Great. So just a question for the audience. When's the last time you saw any of these in a game? Disabled character, a homeless character, someone living with HIV or AIDS, an old queer person. Hell, when's the last time you saw one of those in real life? A person of size that wasn't included as a joke, or a queer character that you even truly identified with. So part of the reason we wanted to do this talk is about representation and why it's important to have these things included. It's interesting, while I was doing research for this panel, I would pitch the idea to people and they would ask me, well, why do we need gay games? Why do we need gay characters? And I was kind of flabbergasted by that question because it usually came from gay people, which doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, so some of the reasons why representation is important is we're able to tell our own story if we're writing our own story. We're not leaving our representation up to straight white dudes. If we're actually doing our writing, doing our development, writing and making our own games, those stories are coming from us, and the only way you're going to get authentic representation is by lived experience. So, who's better to tell the stories than the people that have lived that? It also gives positive role models for future generations. A big theme that I've seen through a lot of this convention and the Game Developers Conference is people talking about how when they were children they would play a certain game, and there'd be a certain character that really resonated with them, and they're like, oh, I see myself in that character. And up to this point, we've been stifled with that, and so it's kind of the onus is on us as we go forward to create more diverse role models so that as people come out, they are seeing themselves represented in games. We have the ability to advance our own social issues faster when we're making our own games as well. The AAA industry is notoriously glacial at moving on social issues. They tend to move very cautiously, follow the money, don't make a lot of big, bold moves. But indies aren't really restrained by that. So we're in this position where we can make our own stories. We can make really outlandish games about, trying to fit 3 people on a bed, or, any of the stuff that we've seen at the con here. We're able to tell these stories and kind of get the ball rolling on these issues a lot faster and a lot more vocally than our bigger counterparts. And the next one is clearly the one that I think the most people understand is validation. It's being able to say to our players, I see you, I recognize you, and without asking or needing it, I'm validating you without judgment or pity. I see you as a person. I know who you are, and I'm telling you that you are important to our cause. Honestly, I think that's the most important part of representation, is that just being able to see ourselves reflected in our games. And then the last one is self-identification or community building. So, we're able to build communities of people with like minds, and also who identify similarly with these kind of games. So we can make games about trans issues. We can make games about people of color and the issues that they deal with. And people will resonate with those games, and then those communities will form around it. So, an interesting thing that I came across, one of the talks at GDC a couple of years ago came with this idea of identity tourism, and this is interesting for the fact that this is how the straight audience actually benefits from us having more diversity. identity tourism is the process of appropriating another identity on the web, which usually involves another gender or race than your own. And so it's kind of being able to see another person's experience without actually having to go through it. And as a result, it's like if we have more diverse characters, then even the straight white bros can have these other opinions and these other viewpoints to kind of look to and experience. And it'll only help to have more exposure, because the faster and the more widespread we have more exposure, we get more normalization in our communities and within society as a whole. So something that I thought was interesting with recently some of the offerings that the industry has had. I went to go see How to Train Your Dragon 2, and there was this big hoopla about them including a gay character, and the media went absolutely apeshit over it. And the character was just one character, and I'm glad they chose the one they did, because he was missing limbs, and he was kind of like, he had a lot of interesting things to him. But the only reason that he was considered queer was because he had one line where he said, "That's why I didn't get married, oh, and one other reason." And the news articles about it called it brave. And I was kind of insulted by it. It's like, how do you call this brave when you're not even admitting it? You're not even saying the character is gay. Like, I feel like we're at this.
What if the character is asexual?
Same point. Yeah, I guess my view on it is, if you're gonna pander, don't half-ass it. Either full-ass it or don't ass it at all. Like, I don't want you to just throw me some breadcrumbs and be like, oh, well, we threw in a black character, we threw in a gay character, oh, that's enough, right? Like, that's just insulting. We're at a point now where we should be demanding more out of it. We should be saying, oh, well, you've got a gay character, but he's not interesting, and he's a background character. Or, oh, you've got a trans character, but again, they're a prostitute. Like, we need to get out of this kind of roadmap of having our characters are included as kind of a token checklist, but they're not interesting, they're not relevant, they're really more kind of a set dressing, if anything. So that's one thing I thought was kind of interesting, because we're seeing a lot of this happening, where people are realizing that gay characters are kind of a necessity, but they're adding them in really small and piecemeal, and ultimately we don't get very interesting characters out of it. We get these kind of like shallow tropes, and they don't expand much on them. So the first thing we're going to talk about with regards to kind of different groups to incorporate is characters with differing beauty standards. Currently, we see a lot of characters with tattoos, piercings, mostly Caucasian, and either thin or muscled, or what they consider healthy, which is a very loaded word, because it implies that if you aren't what they consider healthy, then you must be unhealthy. Things we still have a long way to go on: people of color, different ethnicities, people with size, people with birth deformities and body modification, so disabled characters. We still got a long way to go on these particular issues, among other things. So we actually are making for this talk specifically, we're making a deliberate decision. We're not really covering gender issues or race issues. This is more about kind of markets that are not very talked about, because we've got a lot of talks about those issues, and they're important and relevant, but they're also huge, and they lie kind of outside the scope of this talk. So this is kind of going into our first real group. Is in the gay community specifically, we kind of run into this trap of masculine and feminine, where masculinity is kind of put on a pedestal. And even in the gay community, we find that gay men that are effeminate tend to be looked down upon. And there's a priority kind of put to masculine. And this is internalized homophobia, internalized misogyny, rearing its head. And we get to this point where the gay characters we see, if they are included as a effeminate character, they tend to be villains a lot of times. And this is just an old movie trope too. If you look at Wreck-It Ralph, the main character there was this flamboyant candy king, and it was entirely a throwback to most of the time when our presence in media kind of consisted of either being a flaming villain or a tragic dying AIDS victim or a fabulous accessory to some straight woman. You know, those are the categories that we've kind of come from. And we're seeing a lot more representation outside of that now, but it's really slow moving. So we run into this trap now where we want to include gay characters and we want people to identify with them, but we have to be conscious of not putting a value judgment on having masculinity being better or worse, or having femininity being better or worse, because there's a huge spectrum. You can have masculine-looking characters that are quite effeminate. You can have effeminate-looking characters that are actually quite masculine in their actions. So it's a little harder to pick apart those things without placing a value judgment on them. Perfect example, like we've got just a huge spectrum of people. There's no template, there's no baseline for saying this is what a gay man is, this is what a lesbian is. So yeah.
Okay, so well, our next talk is probably the more neglected group in the discussions about how do you put gay characters into gaming by the communities of bears, otters, and others of size. So, we do happen to have in gaming the straight version of bears, wolves, and otters, such as Zangief from Street Fighter 4, Bixby from Telltale Games' The Wolf Among Us,
and Nathan Drake from Uncharted, and
Booker DeWitt from Bioshock Infinite.
Actually, go back to the last slide. Isn't this kind of a scathing indictment of the industry and their kind of choices of how they make characters? Like, these are two separate games by different developers, and the characters are almost identical. Like a straight white dude, like 40s, brown hair. What the hell? And this is kind of what we see as being promoted as the default character, because it's considered to be like the most or the least offensive to people. It's like the most relatable, and as a result, yeah, we get carbon copies. Like it's the same dude.
I mean, they're already wearing holsters.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though one has a shotgun. It's like,
he's clearly different because he has a shotgun. Clearly.
and he's wearing it as an ascot. So there's their nod to the gay people. Okay, so, but what we do have is a problem with characters of size in gaming. Generally, they are a supporting character, and they follow stereotypes: lazy, slow, unintelligent, and gorging themselves, not just on food, but more of a lack of self-control and an overindulgence into these. Or sometimes they're just the tank. And they're usually always alone. There's no relationship that they have on the side or things. It's just, I'm just there. But some of the more popular things in gaming we see are Peach from Beyond Good and Evil, the Heavy from Team Fortress 2, Murray from the Sly Cooper series, Bob from Tekken, King Hippo.
So this one's kind of interesting.
And Rufus.
Rufus from Street Fighter 4. A lot of these characters, especially in the last couple slides here, they are defined by their weight. They're a fat character first, and we don't really know much about them other than that when we look at them. And that's kind of the problem, is we see them included. We're like, oh, great, we got a fat guy in here, but it's presented kind of as a prop more than a person. They're defined by body size.
It has a carnival aspect.
Exactly. Yeah, he looks like a balloon, and that's part of the problem here. Is that they're not realistic representations. These characters don't look or feel capable. They feel buffoonish. It's kind of, they're put in there as to be a fool when you're making a mockery of them. And that's kind of the thing you want to avoid if you're adding heavier characters. You want to make them feel capable and not kind of make a character that feels like it would have dignity in itself versus something that's just kind of there for a joke.
Right. And speaking of that, even in the video by Valve for Team Fortress 2 with the Heavy, it follows exactly all of these stereotypes, where he admits that he is unintelligent, where he only cares about
Sandwiches.
sandwiches, but his gun Sasha, you know, nobody touches it, and he's like, it's $400,000 to, you know, to fire it for 12 seconds, and he goes around, he laughs at all the carnage he's doing, and he's like, some people can, you know, outsmart me. That may be so, but you can't outrun the bullet. It's just very glaring how, you know, they're seeing the heavy, as opposed to every other video about all the other characters who aren't him.
He's very single-minded.
Yeah.
He's got a very singular goal. Some other characters that we don't have slides for, but Edmund Honda from Street Fighter is a classic example of kind of a character that's actually done more right. If you look at him as a character, he's you know, he's a large character, but he's not put in a way where he looks incapable. You know, he seems like he carries his body mass in a natural way, and he can fight back, and he actually seems like a capable character. Dr. Eggman from Sonic is another one where he's kind of like this character, where he's a balloon character, and also Wario from the Mario series is another one where he's kind of more of a fool character, but in that case it kind of makes sense because it's more of a cartoony series.
Yeah. So, but however, in media, in the mainstream media, we've tended to be more corrected in this position. We've given them lead roles. We've allowed them to hold a variety of jobs, both blue and white collar, as well as being either stay-at-home parents or work from home, and they're all completely capable. With Modern Family, we have the character of Cameron, who's not only can be a teacher or a stay-at-home dad, but the football coach. You know, because he was looking for a job and they happened to need one, and his experience allowed him to bring that, but he could still be gay. And from the series From Where the Bears Are, well, it is an exaggeration, you know, written by bears, for bears. You still can see people who can be corners, the chief corners, could be detectives, who can be models, travel writers, bartenders, and actors.
I think the important thing for Where the Bears Are is that the characters are actually portrayed as being sexy, even though they're larger size. That part, it seems like very a monumental piece that I saw was that, you know, it doesn't matter what their body size is, but they're portrayed as like having self-confidence about it and owning it, and not feeling like they have to be ashamed of it, and actually like kind of owning their sexuality around it.
So, as like everything, it's up to us to be able to put, you know, queer main protagonists into our games to show the industry forward that that it's okay to do this. There's a way to do this, and these can't sell, which is a big stopping point for a lot of AAAs wanting to do this.
You're following the money.
Yes. So the first tip, you know, is we have to establish a baseline and a relatability to these characters.
Mm-hmm.
There is a context of the everyman, they don't have to be stereotyped. They can be anything you want them to be. If you want them to be the gun-toting, you know, savior of the human race, they can be. Or if you just want them to be a doctor. The reason it's important is because we want to allow the player to identify with this protagonist in a better way than gays in gaming have been able to be identified with. You need a move, right?
Yeah.
So, also when it comes to romance and gestures, we can put them in more subtly so that they can be accepted more easily. In the current frat culture of the bromance, if we don't have to do the bromance, but if we start to take elements from it and display it into our characters, you can get this more, the hugging, the, you know, the being there for one another.
I think that kind of falls in the line of normalizing relationships between men without a sexual component. That's largely what bromance is about. It's like two straight dudes being okay enough to kind of be really friendly and physical with each other without it kind of being gay, so to speak. So some more tips for kind of making a relatable queer protagonist is don't define them by their sexuality. Don't make the gay character, and this is something that's come up in a lot of other panels. You don't want to make a character that's defined by their one thing. You don't want to make the fat guy. You don't want to make the trans woman. You don't want to make the black character. You don't want to make a character that is their single dimension that way. And the way to do that is give them lived life experience. If you want a character that's going to be interesting, give them backstories that are relatable. If it's a gay character, they'll generally have a coming out story of some kind. They'll have a family history. Were they a foster child? Were they abused at home? Did they do drugs at some point? There's a lot of deep, interesting stuff that can be dredged up out of that history that isn't really taken into account with a lot of characters. They kind of flesh it over as like, oh, this character looks interesting, but they're just completely blank as a slate.
Yeah, when it comes to realistic romantic options, we need to be more, well, there are certain games out there like the ones from BioWare that have given us the options to pursue gay romances. They're often limited to what you can do, such as the blue alien who can be bisexual, but...
I think with giving props to BioWare, they've made leaps and bounds as far as like adding in gay romances. The main beef that I have with games like ones made by BioWare is that they're what I consider an avatar-based characters. So you can choose a character, and you can be Shepherd, or you can be female Shepherd, and they are, all your romance options are totally bisexual, and it doesn't matter who romances who. There's no definitive thing stating, okay, this character is just gay, this character is just straight, and they won't engage in that kind of romance. And there are exceptions to that. The BioWare, just all our games across the board have been pretty good about including kind of more and more options for it, especially with the new Dragon Age character that's just gay, which is, to me it's really interesting that we finally hit a point where we can say, okay, well, we're giving romance options and it's a realistic one. He won't engage with females because he's a realistic gay character.
But in the original Dragon Age, we are still sort of limited by the only true romance that if you're playing the male character you could have was with the elf. There was you couldn't get with the human, male, or the dwarf unless you went to sleep with the gay prostitute.
They were the hot ones.
Yeah.
And again, the last part is don't feel the need to rely on stereotypes or tropes to define your characters.
But if we take all of these into consideration, we come up with, at least in mainstream media, one person who seems to follow these rules almost to a T, and that's Captain Jack Harkness from Doctor Who and Torchwood fame. He's still able to be masculine and heroic, but he's able to do things that we don't generally assume with the straight masculine characters, such as being able to smile or laugh, be tender, be romantic. But I think this sums up Captain Jack. He makes suspenders look sexy.
An interesting thing about this character is he's not defined solely by violence. A lot of straight characters, their masculinity is defined by how well they do violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with Captain Jack, you got to sort of get the whole package. Not only because he's not always turning to the violent solution unless it is the option that needs to be pursued. So, but an important part to all of this is we have to understand that there's a thing called audience-dependent relatability. Depending on who you're making for the audience, you're going to have to make a choice on the type of characters you're making. If you're making a game for a purely queer audience, it's okay to have the Jack character. Because, as we've seen, Jack's not always just Jack.
I think this relates to, I mean, you want to figure out who your audience is, and if you're making a game that is focused on a very specific subsection of it, you can make deliberate decisions to make kind of more stereotypical characters. But I think the main thing regarding that is the decision should be deliberate and not default. It shouldn't be like, oh, well, we're adding in a gay character, he automatically is a flaming drag queen. Like that shouldn't be the way that it's done. If you're putting these characters in, make deliberate decisions to make them interesting and add them in as characters and flesh them out.
All right. Sort of in this case where we have Will, which is more fleshed out. But when we come to romance in the game, man, we have to remember that homomance is equal to heteromance. Okay?
Sounds like magic.
But the only difference is the parties involved. Instead of a guy and a girl, it's 2 guys or 2 girls in these cases. But this can be done well because of Sage Row 4.
Buffering. Let's get this.
No, now we can see it.
I have to tell you something. For years I thought you were dead, and I blamed myself for it. When you were gone, there was a hole in my life that I tried to fill with anything I could. Partying, sex, revenge. Sometimes a weird combination of the 3. But nothing worked. Nothing ever made me feel alive like you did. And I always thought it was just because I was depressed, but seeing you now has made me realize how much I need you. I know I'm not Aisha, and I'm not trying to be, but if...
I love the obligatory little mic from the side there. Like,
let's leave some of the mystery.
So this goes back to a previous comment I made about talking about actually making a gay game. Games at this point are kind of still largely considered escapist fluff. We can't handle, or we can't deal with really serious issues in the mainstream games at least. We see them a lot in kind of the indie audience. We can tell personal stories and biographical stories. But we're at this point now where, you know, I've had people ask me, well, how do you make a gay game fun? And my response is, you don't have to. Games don't have to be fun. I wouldn't call Gone Home or Dear Esther fun. They're experiences, they're interesting. I like playing them for the environment that they give me, but I would not call them fun. And until we get to this point where games can be considered on the same par with books and plays and movies about being able to tackle large, serious issues, we're not going to be able to really move past that. You know, part of this is like, you know, we can see in movies we can tackle issues like HIV and AIDS. You know, when is the game industry going to get to the point where we can tackle these same issues? When do we get our version of The Normal Heart? When do we get our version of We Were Here? When do we get our version of How to Survive a Plague? You know, these kind of stories that tell, you know, a history of our experience as a community. So the first, so we're going to kind of switch gears now into a couple of smaller subsets. First one is differently abled characters, disabled characters. Things to consider if you're making a game that includes characters that are differently abled, or if you're making a game that's about characters that are differently abled, is to focus on affordances and accessibility. So if you're making a game for people with disabilities, it's always primed to incorporate gameplay mechanics that are afforded to them. So if you are making a game for blind people, you want to make it more audio sensitive or tactile. Just take into account who your audience is. If you're making a game about differently able characters, you might want to work on kind of recreating the experience, like sensory changes. If you're making a game about someone who's colorblind, make your graphics reflect that, make them look colorblind. And make sure, again, that the disability isn't the defining point of what makes that character. A great example of a game that kind of works in the sensory deprivation is a game called Deep Sea, which they've shown at GDC and a number of other places, where it's played with this modified gas mask diving helmet thing, and it's a sensory deprivation game where all you hear is these low booming sounds nearby. And the game is meant to be that you're a deep sea diver and you're surrounded by all these sea monsters and you can't see them, you can only hear them. And when you breathe, the audio from your breathing gets fed back into your hearing. So you have to hold your breath to hear the monsters. And you already can't see anything. So it's the entire experience is kind of intense. People have passed out from it. Yeah, I mean, it fits kind of with, if you think about it in category of the S&M community, that would be a perfect game for that. Yeah, that would go over really well. But that's kind of an interesting take on working with sensory deprivation as a game mechanic. So here's some ideas for things you can do with different able characters. A first-person game where you're in a wheelchair, all of a sudden stairs become an actual obstacle. What if you're in a wheelchair and you're doing a platformer? You can't jump. You only have lifts and ramps to deal with. What if your character, when you're in the game, anytime there's a bright flash, the camera starts shaking and you have a seizure? Or even what about having a character that has missing limbs and you have to compensate? What if you have a one-handed character trying to do Tomb Raider? Trying to navigate an area without being able to grab onto ledges. Kind of working within these constraints. There's a really dense, fertile area here of game mechanics that nobody's really touching on, and it's kind of a disservice. There's a market that is hungry for this content, and there's also a lot of mechanics that can come from it, and nobody's really working on it. The next group is displaced or homeless characters. Currently, 40% of homeless youth in the US are LGBT. And that's largely a result of kids getting kicked out of the house when they come out, having home troubles, things like that. And nobody's really making games about this. Nobody's really telling this story. Even the news doesn't really talk about homeless people. Living in San Francisco, we're kind of surrounded by it, and we get a little inundated with it. It gets a little, we see it all the time, and so it gets a little desensitizing. But we are still kind of living with it as reality. We've got a bunch of homeless people, and they're LGBT, they're part of our community. So ways to kind of incorporate this topic is to shine light on the real world issue. Make sure that you're talking about ways to deal with this problem in the real world. Destigmatize it to make it so that the characters and the subject matter isn't meant to be vilified, and also humanize the victims. That's the main part. With a lot of these, is to make sure that if you're representing these characters, that they aren't put as tragic heroes. They aren't put as these stereotypical tropes. Make them living, breathing characters that are interesting and have dynamic backstories. A lot of the homeless people that I've met in San Francisco here, they always have interesting stories about kind of their fall from grace, if you will. There's a lot to it. So interesting characters that are homeless in games currently. There isn't a lot of them, but I think Walking Dead did one really excellently named Chuck in the first season. He's interesting because when they meet him, some of the characters make a comment about, oh, he's homeless, and they're like, well, we're all homeless. It's the zombie apocalypse. Doesn't really matter if he's homeless if none of us have a home. So it was kind of this humanizing moment where they kind of realized, oh, he's just a dude like us now. Once they remove that kind of social class barrier. Last Pick Productions did a Kickstarter for a game called I Beg, which thankfully they changed the name to more general Homeless. And it's kind of this pixel version game where you are playing as a video game developer and you get laid off, and then all of a sudden months go by and your savings dwindle and you have to sell everything, and then you end up homeless. And it's about surviving in the street and keeping your spirits up and keeping your hygiene up. So you have to like go to the beach and take a shower there and save up money for like soap and food and just general things. I think it was great because they actually made the game kind of as a charity for donating money to actual homeless programs. So I thought that was great. And this is kind of a way to not do it. In Tony Hawk, they have a character called Ali the Magic Bum, and he's called that because in one of the levels, you have to skate over him as like a ramp, and he kind of teleports from like one place to it. You can just see him in a bunch of different places, and it's kind of the idea of like, he's just a prop, he's not a human, he's just a thing. And it's like, yeah, it's great that you have a homeless character, but he's not a character at this point, he's just scenery. And why even bother at that point? This one came out a little while ago called Spent, and it's a game about living 30 days when you're basically out of a job and hemorrhaging money really quickly. And it's a really interesting kind of hard to play game, actually. Not hard in the fact that it's difficult, but hard like emotionally, because it's really quick to see how quickly money just like flows out and how hard it is to live on like a really low amount of money. And then this is a game that I actually made for a game jam. It was kind of a panhandling simulator about San Francisco. And the thing that I thought was funny about this was that during the game jam it was made with, people got like absolutely crazy when I mentioned what it was about. They thought it was going to be super exploitive, and it was like making a joke about it. And it's like, no, you can make games about these topics without them having to be the butt of a joke. Some ideas for displaced characters: Great Depression, Carpetbagger, Riding the Rails if you're doing like a period piece. A game where you have to collect recyclables to survive. We see them all over San Francisco. Trying to travel home, to another state without money, so hitchhiking, trying to survive that way, or just general themes of travel and basic survival in modern times. And the last bit we're going to touch on are characters with HIV and AIDS. And this kind of piggybacks on the displaced characters issue. You want to shine light on the issue, just differentize and humanize the victims, and avoid making the tragic dying AIDS victim trope where, the character is HIV. That doesn't define who they are as a character. They're still an interesting character. There's still a lot of things you can do with them that aren't, they're not defined by the virus. So, kind of some ideas to what to do with the idea of HIV in a game. Take the plague approach. If you're looking at it as a virus, there's plenty of games out there that deal with virus spreading as a game mechanic. What if The Last of Us was about an airborne AIDS virus? How would that change the context of the game itself? Or also a game like Pandemic, where you have to, you're a viral specialist and you have to travel around the globe fighting off plagues. What if it was like, Carmen Sandiego style, which comes to game idea, whose HIV is it anyway? It's a detective murder mystery. You have a bunch of corpses and a bunch of clues, and you have to fly around and try and stop the virus and figure out who patient zero is. It's not what people would expect. It tackles the issue. You can do it in a way that mimics how it actually how the outbreak actually happened with the Canadian flight attendant that they consider patient zero. So there's ways to kind of mirror this with real life things.
So the last thing I'd like to close up with is following the good adage of practice what you preach. Our upcoming title that we're working on called Welcome to Grizzly Bay. Our approach to this is to try and use some of these lessons to create our characters, such as having a conversation system that leads to your dating options as you go through talking to the various people in town and the surrounding area, as you choose different options, different activities and paths will open up for you to do things. For example, if you talk to somebody and they seem turned off, you get more towards the I just want to be friends or leave me the hell alone options. But if you happen to be more kind and flirty to them, they may open up to the more romantic options, or at least the case of the Jane Silent Bob style heterosexual life mate or romance options. But an important part is having non-human, since we have a mix of both non-human and non-traditional partner setups.
So we're kind of segueing the diversity issue of, when with our game, we didn't want to make it like, oh, well, you can romance the black guy, you can romance the white guy, you can romance the woman. So we're taking this approach of making a lot of the romantic options being anthropomorphic animals. So it's like, oh, you can date the bear, you can date the otter, you can date the beaver. And they're just kind of being, we're still using a bit of stereotype, but we're doing it in a way where it's kind of not obvious what their gender is or what their, you really only figure that out through conversation with them. So you're not making your decisions solely on appearance. So, and the same thing with diverse non-player characters. So we're kind of fleshing out our world with characters that are more diverse and interesting and things you wouldn't expect. And this is just good general advice for like any game really. And so kind of a general overview, it's like Minecraft, Animal Crossing, and bar a dating sim. So, this particular game is actually called Meat Log Mountain, and I highly recommend it. There aren't many games out there that I can say I've played that make me blush. This game, it's actually got a really in-depth dating sim setup for it, and it's one of the few games that I've played where actually, the romantic options felt genuine, felt real, and actually were kind of erotic, and I was like kind of surprised by it. I think development may have ceased on it like 2011, but it's still floating on me. So yeah, in closing, just go more Meat Log Mountain.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So in closing, just go make more queer games, include more queer characters, and don't be afraid to tackle weird, diverse subject matter. We don't have anyone to answer to. We don't have to ask permission from anyone. We're at a point now where the gatekeepers are gone or they're out on vacation, and we can do whatever we want with games. We don't have to be restricted by it anymore. So, thank you.
What would you suggest to be aware of for making queer, inclusive, but kid-friendly games?
Focus less on the sexuality as being a main element then.
Especially since the characters are kids.
Yeah, it's kind of that's kind of a touchy subject because by and large, LGBT people are defined by sexuality. So you're crossing this gray area of like, how do we make something that's kid-friendly and also sexual? So I think the way to do that is to give them positive role models in game. If you're going to include gay characters, have like, I think Night in the Woods is a great example. They have the character Angus and I forget the other name. It's a wolf and a bear, and they're great because they're a gay couple, but it's like not. They do it in a really nonchalant way. It's like not overt. And so you just see them and they're holding hands and they're just like, they're doing couple things, but it's not put in a way where it's called out that that's different. I think that's probably the easiest way to go about doing characters in a game, or doing characters in a kids game, or characters for kids, is to just keep the sex part out, but keep the romance, keep the sexuality in that regard. Yeah.
So you talked about making games focus on different things, but how do you do something like showing disability, like someone being in a wheelchair, and making things obstacles without sending across the message that all these obstacles make them helpless as opposed to people who don't have that disability?
That's a great question. That's actually something that I was thinking about myself, because you want to make the game empowering without making a value judgment on that. And I think the easiest way to do that is make it so that they can get over the obstacles in interesting ways and maybe not focus on the failure states for that. It's like if you're making a game where a character's in a wheelchair, make Perfect example would be, if you're like in a first-person shooter style game in a wheelchair, maybe as you go along, you can purchase upgrades to get handicap-accessible ramps. Might have things that change the environment where the game isn't focused on the wheelchair part, it's focused on making changes in the environment to overcome the obstacle. So you want to make it so that the disability isn't the focus of it, but it's an element of it, so that it's present but not focused on it. So yeah, I think we're wrapped up for time. But thank you all for coming again.